welcome back. You are safe here. The world outside fades, and the evening feels like a warm blanket. In this gentle quiet of St. Mary Mead, Miss Marple waits her kind eyes, seeing what others cannot. In the heart of Devon, a bride vanishes on her wedding eve, Emily Hargrove, gone without a trace, her pearl necklace hiding a deadly secret. Miss Jane Marple unravels a web of lies, love, betrayal, murder. Was Emily kidnapped, or did she flee? A truth too dark to face. The past holds the key, but the killer is closer than she thinks. One twist could unravel everything or end it. Chapter 1. The Invitation to Willowbrook, the village of Willowbrook. A sleepy hamlet cradled in the verdant folds of Devon's rolling hills, was not the sort of place where one expected mysteries to unfold. Its cobblestone lanes, lined with ivy-clad cottages and a single ancient church, seemed to belong to a quieter, more innocent world. Yet, as Miss Jane Marple knew better than most, innocence was often a veneer, and the quietest villagers could harbour the deepest secrets. It was on a crisp autumn morning, with the first leaves turning amber, that Miss Marple received a letter that would draw her into one such enigma. Seated in her modest sitting room in St. Mary Mead, Miss Marple sipped her morning tea, her delicate hands cradling a porcelain cup as she perused the post. The room was a study in understated comfort. A chintz-covered armchair, a small table with a vase of late-blooming roses, and her knitting basket, ever present, spilling over with soft wool. The letter, written in an elegant, slightly tremulous hand, bore the crest of Willowbrook Manor. It was from Lady Beatrice Thornton, an old acquaintance from her school days at the Florence Trevelyan Academy, a woman whose warmth and wit had always been tempered by a certain nervous energy. "Dear Jane," the letter began, "I trust this finds you in good health and spirits. It has been far too long since we last corresponded, and I fear I write now with a request born of unease. My nephew, Richard Thornton, is to marry Emily Hargrove, the only daughter of Sir Reginald Hargrove, at Willowbrook Manor next week. The preparations are joyous, yet I cannot shake a sense of disquiet. There are undercurrents, here family tensions, perhaps, or something less tangible. Your keen insight, so often praised, would be a comfort to me. Do come, Jane, if you can spare the time. Your presence would ease my mind, and I dare say you'd find the manor's gardens a delight." Miss Marple set the letter down, her pale blue eyes narrowing thoughtfully. Lady Beatrice was not given to hysterics, yet her words carried a weight of apprehension that piqued Miss Marple's curiosity. She knew Willowbrook Manor by reputation, a grand, Elizabethan pile owned by Sir Reginald, a widower whose late wife's disappearance years ago had stirred whispers in Devon's social circles. The invitation, with its subtle plea, was not merely a call to celebrate a wedding, but a summons to observe, to listen, to unravel whatever threads of discord Lady Beatrice sensed. Rising from her chair, Miss Marple crossed to the window, where the morning sun cast dappled shadows across her garden. She thought of St. Mary Mead, where she had solved many a puzzle by noting the small, human frailties that others overlooked: the jealous glance of a jilted suitor, the nervous tick of a liar, the misplaced word that betrayed a secret. Willowbrook, she suspected, would be no different. People, after all, were much the same everywhere. Their motives as predictable as the seasons, yet endlessly varied in their expression. She resolved to accept the invitation, her mind already turning over the possibilities. A wedding, a grand house, a family with a shadowed past. There was, she felt, a story waiting to be uncovered. The journey to Willowbrook was a pleasant one, the train rattling through countryside ablaze with autumn hues. Miss Marple, dressed in her usual tweed skirt and sensible cardigan, her white hair neatly pinned beneath a modest hat, sat with her knitting in her lap, her needles clicking rhythmically. Beside her, a young woman in a smart cloche hat chattered about the wedding, having read of it in the society pages. Emily Hargrove is said to be a vision, she gushed, and Richard Thornton's shut a catch. A barrister, you know, with chambers in London. They say he's frightfully clever. Miss Marple smiled politely, her mind filing away the tidbit. Clever men, she knew, could be as prone to folly as anyone else, and barristers often had a knack for hiding truths as much as uncovering them. She recalled a case in St. Mary Mead, where a solicitor's charm had masked a penchant for blackmail, until a misplaced ledger revealed all. Indeed, she murmured, her needles pausing. It sounds a most splendid affair. Willowbrook Manor loomed into view as the carriage from the station wound up a tree-lined drive. The house was a magnificent sprawl of grey stone, its mullioned windows glinting in the late afternoon light. Ivy clung to its walls, and the gardens, meticulously tended, stretched toward a river that glimmered in the distance. Miss Marple alighted, her small suitcase in hand, and was greeted by Lady Beatrice herself, a tall, angular woman with greying curls and an anxious smile. "Jane, you dear soul," Lady Beatrice exclaimed, clasping Miss Marple's hands. "I cannot tell you how relieved I am that you've come. The house is in a whirl, and I fear well, never mind that now. Come, let me show you to your room." As they crossed the threshold into the manor's grand hall, Miss Marple's eyes took in the details. The polished oak panelling, the ancestral portraits with their stern gazes, the faint scent of beeswax and roses. Servants bustled about, carrying trays of crystal glasses and silver candelabras, preparing for the wedding festivities. Yet, beneath the bustle, there was a tension, like the hush before a storm. Miss Marple's sharp gaze caught the butler's stiff posture, the maid's hurried glance toward a closed door, the way Lady Beatrice's fingers twisted her pearl bracelet. "Your nephew's wedding sounds delightful," Miss Marple said, her voice gentle but probing. "Tell me about the happy couple." Lady Beatrice led her up a sweeping staircase, her voice bright but strained. "Oh, Emily is a darling, girl ethereal, almost, with her pale hair and soft voice. Sir Reginald dotes on her, perhaps too much. Richard is devoted, of course. He's risen quickly in his profession, and he's so very fond of Emily." But she hesitated, glancing over her shoulder. There are always complications in families. Like these, aren't there? Old wounds, unspoken grudges. Miss Marple nodded, her expression serene but her mind alert. "Families are like tapestries," she said. "The most beautiful patterns often hide the tightest knots." They reached a cozy guest room overlooking the gardens, its windows framed by chintz curtains. Lady Beatrice lingered, as if reluctant to leave. "Jane, you'll meet everyone at dinner tonight. Sir Reginald, of course, and his sister-in-law, Mrs. Agatha Croft, who runs the household. Then there's Victor Langford, Richard's best man, a charming fellow, but perhaps a bit too fond of attention. And Clara Jenkins, Emily's maid, who's been with her since childhood. I do hope you'll enjoy yourself." "I'm sure I shall," Miss Marple replied, setting her knitting basket on the bedside table. "And I'll keep my eyes open as you asked." Dinner that evening was a lavish affair, held in the manor's dining room, where a chandelier cast golden light over a table laden with fine china and silver. Sir Reginald Hargrove, a portly man with a florid face and a booming laugh presided at the head, his pride in his daughter evident in every gesture. Emily sat beside him, her delicate features framed by a cascade of platinum hair, her blue eyes luminous yet shadowed, as if by some inner worry. She wore a simple silk gown and a pearl necklace, its luster catching the candlelight. Miss Marple, seated opposite, noted how Emily's fingers brushed the pearls. A nervous habit. Richard Thornton, at Emily's side, was every inch the dashing groom-to-be. His dark hair was neatly combed, his smile confident, yet Miss Marple caught a flicker of intensity in his gaze when he looked at Emily, as if he were studying her rather than admiring her. Victor Langford, the best man, was a contrast fairhead, with a roguish grin and a quick wit that kept the table laughing. Yet his charm, Miss Marple thought, had a practiced air, like the curate in St. Mary Mead who'd charmed donations from widows while pocketing a few for himself. Mrs. Agatha Croft, a thin woman with sharp features and a perpetually pursed mouth, sat ramrod straight, her eyes darting over the guests like a hawk's. She spoke little, but when she did, her words were clipped, authoritative. Clara Jenkins, the maid, hovered at the edges, refilling glasses with a quiet efficiency, though Miss Marple noticed her hands trembled slightly when she served Emily. As the meal progressed, conversation turned to the wedding plans. Sir Reginald raised a glass, his voice hearty. "To my Emily and her Richard, a union that will bring joy to this old house. May it erase the shadows of the past." A murmur of agreement followed, but Miss Marple's ears caught a dissonant note. Mrs. Croft's fork clinked sharply against her plate, and Emily's smile faltered, her hand tightening on her napkin. Lady Beatrice, catching Miss Marple's eye, gave a slight shake of her head, as if to say, "Not now." Later, as coffee was served in the drawing room, Miss Marple sat quietly, her knitting needles clicking softly. She listened as Victor regaled the group with tales of his travels, noting how his stories skirted any mention of his family. Richard, meanwhile, spoke earnestly of his hopes for a quiet life with Emily, though his words seemed rehearsed, like a speech prepared for a jury. Emily herself was subdued, answering questions with a shy smile but volunteering little. When asked about her necklace, she touched it again, saying only, "It was mother's. Father insists I wear it for the wedding." Miss Marple's thoughts drifted to Lady Beatrice's letter, to the mention of unease. She recalled a wedding in St. Mary Mead, where a bride's hesitation had masked a secret engagement to another man, revealed only when a letter slipped from her prayer book. Weddings, she knew, brought old secrets to the surface, like bubbles in a pond. As she watched Emily excuse herself early, claiming fatigue, Miss Marple's instinct sharpened. The girl's pallor, her nervous gestures, suggested more than bridal jitters. After dinner, as the guests dispersed, Lady Beatrice drew Miss Marple aside in the hall. "Did you notice anything, Jane?" she whispered, her eyes darting toward the staircase where Emily had vanished. "Only what one might expect," Miss Marple replied, her voice mild. "A house full of people, each with their own thoughts. But tell me, Beatrice, what do you know of Sir Reginald's late wife? Her disappearance, I understand, was quite the mystery." Lady Beatrice's face paled. "Oh, Jane, it was dreadful. Margaret Hargrove vanished one night, years ago. They found her shawl by the river, and everyone assumed she drowned, though her body was never found. There were rumors of a lover, of a quarrel with Reginald. He was devastated, or so he claimed. Emily was just a child then, but it marked her, poor dear." Miss Marple nodded, her mind turning over the tale. "Grief leaves long shadows," she said, "and old mysteries have a way of stirring when new ones begin." As she retired to her room, Miss Marple paused at her window, gazing out at the moonlit gardens. The river glinted faintly in the distance, its waters whispering secrets of their own. She thought of the pearl necklace, of Emily's trembling hands, of the undercurrents Lady Beatrice feared. Somewhere in this house, she sensed a thread waited to be pulled, a thread that might unravel a tapestry of deception. Settling into bed, her knitting basket at her side, Miss Marple resolved to watch, to listen, and to wait for the moment when the truth, like a shy guest, would reveal itself. The manor slept, or so it seemed, but in the small hours, a faint cry echoed from the gardens, sharp and fleeting, like the call of a night bird. Miss Marple, awake and alert, rose to peer through her curtains. The lawn was empty, the shadows still. Yet, as she returned to bed, her mind fixed on that sound, so like the cry of a woman in distress she'd once heard in St. Mary Mead, when a maid discovered her mistress's betrayal. Tomorrow, she decided, she would take a closer look at Willowbrook's gardens and its secrets. Chapter 2. Shadows over the manor. The morning sun crept through the heavy drapes of Willowbrook Manor, casting a golden glow across the polished floors, yet it did little to dispel the chill that lingered in the air. Miss Jane Marple, already awake and dressed in her sensible tweed, sat by her window, her knitting needles moving with their usual quiet rhythm. The cry she had heard in the night, sharp, fleeting, and unsettling, remained fixed in her mind like a single discordant note in an otherwise harmonious melody. She had not mentioned it to Lady Beatrice at breakfast, for she preferred to observe before speaking, but she resolved to explore the gardens later, where the sound had seemed to originate. Breakfast was served in a sunlit conservatory, its glass walls framing a view of the manicured lawns and the distant river. The table was laden with silver dishes of kedgeree, toast, and marmalade. But the mood among the guests was less convivial than the previous evening's dinner. Sir Reginald Hargrove, his florid face a shade paler, spoke loudly of the wedding preparations, as if volume could drown out any unease. Emily Hargrove, seated beside her fiancé, Richard Thornton, picked at her food, her delicate hands folding and unfolding her napkin. Her pearl necklace, the family heirloom, gleamed at her throat, its luster a stark contrast to her one expression. Miss Marple, nibbling a slice of toast, watched the room with her usual unobtrusive attention. Richard, ever the attentive groom, leaned toward Emily, murmuring something that brought a fleeting smile to her lips, though her eyes remained distant. Victor Langford, the best man, was late to the table, his fair hair slightly dishevelled, his charm undimmed as he apologized. With a grin, "Overslept, I'm afraid," he said, helping himself to coffee. "City habits don't suit country hours." Miss Marple noted the faint mud stains on the cuffs of his trousers, barely visible but unmistakable to her practiced eye. They were fresh, suggesting a morning walk or perhaps a nocturnal one. Mrs. Agatha Croft, Sir Reginald's sister-in-law, presided over the meal with her customary severity, her sharp gaze missing nothing. She directed the servants with crisp commands, her voice cutting through the chatter like a knife. Clara Jenkins, Emily's maid, moved silently, refilling teapots and clearing plates, her face a mask of deference. Yet Miss Marple caught the girl's quick glance toward Emily, a look that held more than simple devotion, worry, perhaps, or fear. Lady Beatrice, seated beside Miss Marple, leaned close under the pretense of offering more jam. "Did you sleep well, Jane?" she asked, her tone light but her eyes searching. Well enough, Miss Marple replied, her voice mild, though the country air does carry sounds one might not expect. A cry, perhaps, in the night. Lady Beatrice's hand froze on the jar, her lips parting slightly. A cry, oh, probably just a fox. They're common here, you know. Her words came too quickly, and Miss Marple smiled inwardly, recognizing the deflection. In St. Mary Mead, such dismissals often hid truths, like when Mrs. Price had blamed a broken window on a storm when it was her son's cricket ball. The meal concluded, and the guests dispersed to their various activities, Sir Reginald to his study, Richard and Victor to discuss the wedding schedule, and Emily to her room to rest. Miss Marple, declining an offer to join a card game, announced her intention to take a walk in the gardens. The roses must be lovely this time of year, she said, her tone as innocent as a vicar's sermon. The gardens of Willowbrook Manor were a marvel, their paths winding through beds of late-blooming flowers and neatly trimmed hedges. The air was crisp, scented with earth and dew, and the river's soft murmur provided a soothing backdrop. Miss Marple, her sensible shoes crunching on the gravel, moved with the unhurried gait of an elderly lady admiring nature, but her eyes were sharp, scanning the ground and the foliage. She paused near a bed of chrysanthemums, noting a patch of disturbed soil, as if someone had stepped off the path in haste. Nearby, a single petal white, delicate and unmistakably from a rose lay on the grass. She picked it up, turning it over in her fingers. No rose bushes grew in this part of the garden, and the petal was fresh, its edges uncurled, tucking the petal into her handkerchief. Miss Marple continued toward the river, where a stone bench overlooked the water. The river was narrow here, its banks lined with willows that trailed their branches into the current. She sat, her knitting in her lap, and let her mind wander. The cry in the night, the petal, the mud on Victor's trousers, these were fragments, like the pieces of a quilt she had once helped her niece assemble. In St. Mary Mead, such fragments had led her to uncover a theft, when a gardener's muddy boots revealed his nocturnal visits to a neighbor's shed. Her reverie was interrupted by the crunch of footsteps. Clara Jenkins appeared, carrying a basket of linens, her face pale and her eyes red-rimmed. "Oh, Miss Marple," she said, startled. "I didn't expect anyone here." "Just enjoying the view," Miss Marple replied, her smile disarming. "You must be busy, Clara, with the wedding so near." Clara nodded, clutching the basket tightly. "Yes, Miss Emily, she's particular about her things. I'm just airing some linens for her Of course," Miss Marple said, her needles clicking. "She's lucky to have such a devoted maid. You've known her a long time, haven't you?" "Since we were girls, miss," Clara said, her voice softening. "She's like a sister. To me, in a way, I'd do anything for her." Miss Marple's eyes twinkled behind her spectacles. "Loyalty is a fine thing. I had a maid once, in St. Mary Mead, who knew all my little habits. She could tell when I was troubled, just by how I stirred my tea." "Does Emily confide in you, Clara?" Clara hesitated, her fingers tightening on the basket. "Sometimes, miss, she's been quiet lately. Nervous, I suppose, with the wedding and all." "Naturally," Miss Marple said, her tone soothing. "Weddings stir all sorts of feelings. I remember a bride in my village who nearly ran off the night before, all because of a misunderstanding with her groom. But she had a friend who listened, and it all came right." Clara's eyes flickered, and for a moment, Miss Marple thought she might speak. But the girl only nodded, murmuring an excuse about her duties, and hurried away. Miss Marple watched her go, noting the stiffness in her shoulders, the way she glanced back toward the house. Something, she thought, was troubling Clara Jenkins, and it was more than wedding nerves. Returning to the manor, Miss Marple encountered Mrs. Agatha Croft in the hall, directing a footman with a stack of linens. The woman's sharp eyes fixed on Miss Marple, as if assessing her. "Enjoying the gardens, Miss Marple?" she asked, her voice cool. "Very much," Miss Marple replied. "They're quite splendid. Though I did wonder about the roses. I found a petal, but no bushes nearby." Mrs. Croft's expression tightened, almost imperceptibly. "The gardeners must have been pruning," she said. "They're always tidying up. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have matters to attend to." Miss Marple inclined her head, her mind noting the quick dismissal. As she made her way to the drawing room, she overheard a snippet of conversation from the library, where Sir Reginald and Mrs. Croft were speaking in low tones. "It's nonsense, Agatha," Sir Reginald said, his voice gruff. "We can't let old gossip ruin Emily's day." "It's not gossip if it's true," Mrs. Croft replied sharply. "That necklace alone could stir trouble. You know what? It holds." Miss Marple paused, her hand on the drawing-room door, her heart quickening. The necklace, Emily's pearl heirloom, had been mentioned with reverence, but now it seemed to carry a weight beyond sentiment. She recalled a case in St. Mary Mead, where a family locket had hidden a coded message, revealing an inheritance dispute. Could the necklace hold a similar secret? Joining Lady Beatrice in the drawing-room, Miss Marple settled into a chair, her knitting resuming its steady rhythm. "Beatrice," she said, her voice low, "you mentioned last night about Margaret Hargrove's disappearance. Were there ever any clues? Something left behind, perhaps?" Lady Beatrice glanced toward the door, ensuring they were alone. "Only her shawl, found by the river. But there were stories. People said she'd been seen with a man, someone from outside the village. Reginald was furious, accused her of betrayal. The police searched, but nothing came of it." "Why do you ask, Jane?" "Just an old woman's curiosity," Miss Marple said, her eyes on her knitting. "But I find that past shadows often cast light on present ones." As the day wore on, Miss Marple kept her observations to herself, letting the manor's rhythm unfold. She noticed Victor Langford slipping out to the stables, his manner furtive, and Richard's intense gaze as he watched Emily during a brief meeting in the hall. Emily, for her part, seemed to shrink under the weight of attention, her fingers constantly touching the pearl necklace. By evening, as the household gathered for drinks before dinner, Miss Marple's mind was a tapestry of details: the cry, the petal, the mud, the whispered argument, the necklace. Each was a thread, and she sensed they were woven into a pattern she had yet to discern. Dinner that night was quieter, the guests subdued. Emily retired early, claiming a headache, and Clara followed her, casting a worried glance back at the table. Miss Marple, sipping her sherry, watched Victor and Richard linger in the hall, their voices low but heated. "You're imagining things," Richard said, his tone sharp. "Let it go, Victor." "Not this time," Victor replied, his voice barely audible. "You know what's at stake." Miss Marple, pretending to adjust her shawl, filed the exchange away. As she retired to her room, the manor settling into silence, she sat by her window, gazing at the darkened gardens. The river glimmered under the moon, its surface unbroken but its depths unknown. She thought of Margaret Hargrove, of the shawl by the river, of the necklace that held secrets. In St. Mary Mead, she had learned that mysteries often began with a single, overlooked detail, a petal, a cry, a glance. Willowbrook, she felt, was no different. The truth was there, waiting, and she would find it, one careful stitch at a time. Chapter 3. The eve of vows. The air at Willowbrook Manor held a peculiar stillness on the eve of Emily Hargrove's wedding, as if the house itself were holding its breath. The late afternoon sun slanted through the tall windows, casting long shadows. Across the oak-panelled halls, where servants moved with hushed efficiency, polishing silver and arranging flowers, Miss Jane Marple, seated in a cushioned alcove with her knitting, observed the scene with her usual quiet attentiveness. The manor buzzed with anticipation, yet beneath the surface she sensed a current of unease, like the faint tremor of a tuning fork before a storm. The day had been filled with the flurry of final preparations. Emily, pale but composed, had spent the morning with her dressmaker, ensuring the fit of her wedding gown, cascade of ivory silk and lace that had once belonged to her mother. Miss Marple, invited to view the gown, noted the girl's distracted air, her fingers lingering on the delicate fabric as if seeking comfort. "It's beautiful, isn't it?" Emily had said, her voice soft but tinged with something Miss Marple couldn't quite place, sorrow, perhaps, or fear. The pearl necklace, ever present at her throat, seemed to weigh heavily, its luster catching the light like a silent accusation. Now, as evening approached, the household gathered in the drawing-room for a pre-wedding toast. Sir Reginald Hargrove, his face flushed with pride and port, raised a glass of champagne, his voice booming. "To my daughter and her future happiness," he declared, his eyes fixed on Emily, who stood beside Richard Thornton, her fiancé's hand resting lightly on her arm. The guests, Lady Beatrice Thornton, Mrs. Agatha Croft, Victor Langford, and a handful of distant cousins, murmured their assent, their glasses glinting in the candlelight. Miss Marple, sipping her sherry, watched Emily's smile flicker like a candle caught in a draught. Richard's grip on her arm, though gentle, seemed to anchor her in place. Victor Langford, ever the charmer, broke the moment with a jest, regaling the group with a tale of a wedding he'd attended in Paris, where the bride's veil had caught fire from a candelabra. His laughter filled the room, but Miss Marple noted the way his eyes darted toward Emily, as if gauging her reaction. Mrs. Croft, seated stiffly in a high-backed chair, pursed her lips, her disapproval palpable. Clara Jenkins, Emily's maid, hovered at the edges, her hands clasped tightly, her gaze never straying far from her mistress. As the group dispersed for dinner, Miss Marple lingered, her knitting needles clicking softly. She had spent the day observing, piecing together the fragments she'd collected, the cry in the night, the rose petal by the river, the mud on Victor's trousers, the whispered argument between Sir Reginald and Mrs. Croft about the pearl necklace. Each was a clue, small but significant, like the mismatched buttons that had once betrayed a thief in St. Mary Mead. She recalled a conversation with Lady Beatrice that morning, when the older woman had let slip another detail about Margaret Hargrove's disappearance. There was talk of a letter, Beatrice had said, her voice low, found in Margaret's room after she vanished, but Reginald burned it before anyone could read it. He said it was private, but the village gossips thought otherwise. Dinner was a quieter affair than the previous night, the guests subdued by the weight of the impending ceremony. Emily ate little, her eyes fixed on her plate, while Richard spoke animatedly of their honeymoon plans, a tour of the Italian lakes. Miss Marple, seated across from them, noted the contrast. Richard's confidence, Emily's reticence. She also observed Mrs. Croft's sharp glances toward the pearl necklace, as if it were an unwelcome guest at the table. Sir Reginald, meanwhile, waxed sentimental, reminiscing about his own wedding to Margaret, his voice catching when he mentioned her name. After the meal, as coffee was served in the library, Emily excused herself, pleading fatigue. "I must rest for tomorrow," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Clara followed, carrying a shawl, her steps quick and silent. Miss Marple, lingering over her coffee, watched them go, her mind turning over Emily's demeanour. In St. Mary Mead, she had known a bride who'd feigned illness to avoid a marriage she dreaded, slipping away to meet a lover under cover of night. Could Emily be hiding a similar secret? The library, with its shelves of leather-bound books and crackling fire, was a haven of warmth, but the atmosphere was strained. Richard and Victor remained, sharing a brandy and discussing the next day's logistics. Miss Marple, seated in a corner with her knitting, overheard their conversation, their voices low but distinct. "Everything's set, Victor," Richard said, his tone firm. "No need to fuss." "It's not fussing," Victor replied, a hint of irritation in his voice. "You know how these things can go wrong." One misstep, and he broke off, glancing toward Miss Marple, who appeared absorbed in her knitting, but was listening intently as the men moved to a game of billiards. Miss Marple joined Lady Beatrice by the fire, her needles never pausing. "Beatrice," she said, her voice mild, "does Emily seem quite herself to you? Weddings are joyous, of course, but they can unsettle the nerves." Lady Beatrice sighed, her fingers twisting her bracelet. "She's been quiet, Jane, more than usual. I thought it was just nerves, but there's something in her eyes, a shadow. And that necklace Reginald insists she wear it, but it seems to trouble her." Miss Marple nodded, her mind returning to the necklace. Its pearls were flawless, but Mrs. Croft's comment about what it held suggested more than sentimental value. She recalled a case in St. Mary Mead, where a family heirloom locket had concealed a miniature portrait, proof of an illicit affair. Could the necklace hide a similar secret, one tied to Margaret Hargrove's fate? The evening grew late, and the household began to retire. Miss Marple, climbing the grand staircase, paused when she heard voices from a side corridor. Mrs. Croft and Sir Reginald stood near a closed door, their words sharp but hushed. "You're being reckless, Reginald," Mrs. Croft said, her voice like steel. "If that secret comes out, it'll ruin more than the wedding." "It's buried, Agatha," Sir Reginald retorted. "Let it stay that way. Emily doesn't need to know." Miss Marple, hidden by the shadows, felt a prickle of curiosity. Secrets, she knew, had a way of surfacing, like weeds breaking through pavement. She continued to her room, her mind turning over the exchange. As she prepared for bed, she glanced out her window, where the gardens lay bathed in moonlight. The river gleamed, its surface smooth but its depths unreadable. Then, in the stillness, it came again, the cry she'd heard the previous night. Sharp, fleeting, it seemed to rise from the direction of the river, cutting through the silence. Like a blade, Miss Marple, her heart quickening, moved to the window, peering into the darkness. The gardens were empty, the shadows still, but she noted a flicker of movement near the hedger figure, perhaps slipping out of sight. She considered waking Lady Beatrice, but decided against it. In St. Mary Mead, she had learned that night, held secrets best uncovered in daylight. Returning to her bed, Miss Marple sat with her knitting, her mind weaving together the day's observations. The cry, the necklace, the whispered warnings, Emily's unease, Victor's muddy trousers, Clara's anxious glances, each was a piece of a puzzle, and she sensed they formed a picture far darker than a wedding's glow. She thought of Margaret Hargrove, of the letter burned unread, of the shawl by the river. In her village, she had once solved a mystery by noticing a single hairpin out of place, left by a woman who'd fled her husband's wrath. Willowbrook, she felt, held a similar truth, waiting for her to find the one detail that would unravel it all as she drifted toward sleep. Her knitting basket at her side, Miss Marple resolved to watch closely the next day, the wedding day, when emotions would run high and secrets might slip free. The cry in the night, she knew, was no fox. It was a warning, and she would heed it, one careful stitch at a time. Chapter 4. The empty bridal, sweet morning of Emily Hargrove's wedding dawned with a deceptive brilliance, the sun spilling golden light across Willowbrook Manor's gardens, where dew glistened on the grass like scattered diamonds. Inside the manor, however, a chill of panic had taken hold, shattering the festive anticipation. Miss Jane Marple, roused early by the sound of hurried footsteps and raised voices, dressed quickly in her sensible tweed and made her way downstairs, her knitting bag tucked under her arm. The grand hall, usually alive with the clatter of servants, was eerily quiet, save for a low murmur of distress emanating from the direction of Emily's chambers. Clara Jenkins, Emily's maid, stood at the foot of the staircase, her face ashen, her hands wringing a damp handkerchief. "She's gone, miss," Clara stammered as Miss Marple approached. "Miss Emily, she's not in her room. I went to help her dress, and it's empty." Miss Marple's pale blue eyes sharpened behind her spectacles, though her voice remained calm. "Empty, Clara. Tell me exactly what you found." Clara's words tumbled out in a rush. She had entered Emily's room at 7, as planned, to assist with the wedding preparations. The bed was untouched, its coverlet smooth, the pillows undisturbed. The window stood slightly ajar, admitting a cool breeze, and Emily's wedding gown lay neatly folded on an armchair, as if placed with care. Most alarming, the pearl necklace, that heirloom of such whispered significance, was missing from the dresser where Emily had left it the previous night. "There's no sign of her, miss," Clara said, her voice breaking. "Not a note, not a trace." Miss Marple patted the girl's arm gently, her mind already turning over the details. There, Clara. We'll sort this out. Has anyone searched the grounds?" Clara nodded, tears welling. "The butler sent the gardeners out, and Sir Reginald's in a state. Mr. Richard's calling for the constable." As if on cue, Sir Reginald Hargrove appeared in the hall, his florid face drained of colour, his hands trembling as he clutched a walking stick. "Jane," he bellowed, spotting Miss Marple, "you're a sensible woman. Tell me this is some foolish prank. My Emily, gone. It's unthinkable." Miss Marple inclined her head, her expression serene but her mind alert. "We mustn't jump to conclusions, Sir Reginald. Let's see the room, shall we? Details often reveal more than panic." Allows. The bridal suite on the second floor was a vision of elegance, with rosewood furniture, pale silk curtains, and a 4-poster bed draped in lace. Miss Marple stepped inside, her eyes sweeping the scene. The bed, as Clara had said, was pristine, its white linens untouched. The wedding gown, folded with almost ritualistic care, lay on a velvet chair, its lace veil draped beside it. The window, overlooking the gardens, was open just a crack, the latch undone. On the sill, Miss Marple spotted a single white rose petal. identical to the one she'd found the previous day by the river, fresh, unblemished and out of place, for no rose bushes grew near the manor's walls. She bent to examine the floor, noting a faint scuff mark near the window, as if a shoe had grazed the polished wood. The dresser, where the pearl necklace should have been, bore only a small velvet box, empty, its hinges gleaming as if recently opened. Miss Marple's fingers brushed the wood, her mind recalling a case in St. Mary Mead, where a missing brooch had led to a runaway governess, her absence marked by a single hairpin on a windowsill. No struggle, she murmured to herself. No disorder. This was no sudden flight. Richard Thornton burst into the room, his dark hair dishevelled, his eyes wild with agitation. "Jane, have you seen anything, any clue? Emily, she can't have just vanished." His voice cracked, and Miss Marple noted the genuine distress in his tone, though she also observed the way his hands clenched, as if holding back more than grief. "Calm yourself, Mr. Thornton," she said, her voice steady. "Tell me, when did you last see Emily?" "Last night, after dinner," he said, pacing. "She went to bed early, said she needed rest. I thought nothing of it, bridal nerves, you know. But this," he gestured at the empty room, his face a mask of disbelief. Lady Beatrice Thornton, her face pale, joined them, followed by Mrs. Agatha Croft, whose sharp features were set in a grimace of disapproval. "This is nonsense," Mrs. Croft snapped. "The girls probably wandered off, overwhelmed. Young brides do foolish things." Miss Marple raised an eyebrow, her tone mild. "Do they, Mrs. Croft? And yet leave their gown behind, so neatly folded. It's curious, don't you think?" Mrs. Croft's lips tightened, but she said nothing, her eyes flicking to the empty dresser. Lady Beatrice, wringing her hands, whispered, "Jane, could it be, like Margaret, her mother, I mean?" "The river, let's not borrow trouble," Miss Marple said firmly, though her mind noted the parallel. Margaret Hargrove's disappearance, marked by a shawl near the river, loomed over the manor like a spectre. She turned to Clara, who lingered by the door, her eyes red. "Clara, did Emily say anything unusual last night? Anything at all?" Clara shook her head, then hesitated. "She was quiet, Miss. More than usual. She asked me to leave her alone. After I helped her undress, said she wanted to think. I left her by the fire, brushing her hair." Miss Marple nodded, filing away the image of Emily alone, contemplative, the necklace perhaps still around her throat. She recalled a young woman in St. Mary Mead who had vanished the night before her wedding, leaving only a note tucked inside a hymn book, confessing her love for another. Could Emily have planned her own escape? The local constable, Inspector Hale, arrived shortly after, a stout man with a brisk manner and a notebook already in hand. He surveyed the room, his moustache twitching as he listened to Clara's account. "Looks like an elopement to me," he declared. "Young ladies get cold feet, you know. She's probably halfway to London by now, with some secret beau." Miss Marple's lips pursed slightly, her knitting needles pausing in her lap. "An interesting theory, Inspector. But the gown, the necklace, the open window, do they suggest a hasty flight to you?" Hale frowned, clearly unused to being questioned by an elderly spinster. "What are you suggesting, Miss Marple?" "Foul play." "I suggest nothing," she replied, her voice gentle but firm. "I only observe. And I observe that a bride who plans to flee does not fold her gown so carefully, nor leave without her jewels, unless there's more to the story." The inspector grunted, turning to Richard. "Mr. Thornton, any rivals for Miss Hargrove's affections? Anyone who might have lured her away?" Richard's face darkened. None. She was devoted to me. This is madness. She wouldn't just leave. Victor Langford, who had been hovering in the hall, stepped forward, his usual charm subdued. Inspector, I saw Emily last night, briefly, in the corridor. She seemed preoccupied, but she didn't mention leaving. Miss Marple's eyes flicked to Victor, noting the slight hesitation in his words, the way his hands fidgeted in his pockets. She recalled the mud on his trousers, the cry in the night, and now his claim of a late encounter. What time was this, Mr. Langford? She asked, her tone deceptively casual. Victor blinked, as if caught off guard. Oh, around 10, I suppose. I was heading to my room. Miss Marple nodded, her mind noting the timeline. Emily had retired at 9, according to Clara. Victor's sighting placed her in the corridor an hour later, yet Clara had left her alone. In her room, a discrepancy, small but significant, like the mismatched thread that had unravelled a theft in St. Mary Mead. Inspector Hale, impatient, organised a search of the grounds, sending gardeners and footmen to comb the gardens, the riverbank, and the nearby woods. Miss Marple, declining to join the search, returned to the bridal suite, her eyes scanning the room once more. She knelt by the window, examining the sill. The rose petal, still fresh, lay where she'd seen it, and she tucked it into her handkerchief, beside the one from the garden. She then inspected the scuff mark, noting its size and shape too small for a man's shoe, too precise for a stumble. A woman's heel, perhaps, or something else entirely. As she rose, her gaze fell on a small silver hairbrush on the dresser, its bristles holding a few strands of Emily's pale hair. Beside it, almost hidden by a lace doily, was a tiny scrap of paper no larger than a postage stamp, with a single word scrawled in a hurried hand: midnight. Miss Marple slipped the paper into her pocket, her heart quickening. In St. Mary Mead, a similar note had led to a secret meeting, exposing a blackmail scheme. Could this be Emily's plan, or someone else's? Downstairs, the manor was in chaos. Sir Reginald, fortified by brandy, raged at the servants, demanding answers. Richard paced the hall, his face a storm of worry and anger. Mrs. Croft, ever composed, issued orders to keep the guests calm, though her eyes betrayed a flicker of unease. Lady Beatrice, clinging to Miss Marple's arm, whispered, "Jane, this is too much like Margaret's time. The emptiness, the silence, it's as if the house is cursed." "Nonsense, Beatrice," Miss Marple said, though her tone was kind. "Houses don't curse people. People create their own mysteries. We'll find Emily, and the truth with her." As the search parties returned, with no sign of Emily, Inspector Hale's elopement theory gained traction, though Miss Marple remained skeptical. The folded gown, the missing necklace, the rose petal, the scrawled note, these were not the signs of an impulsive flight, but of something deliberate, planned. She thought of Margaret Hargrove, of the burned letter, of the shawl by the river. The past, she sensed, was reaching into the present, and the pearl necklace was the thread tying them together. As noon approached, Miss Marple sat in the drawing room, her knitting a steady rhythm, her mind weaving the clues into a pattern. The cry in the night, the petal, the note, Victor's late sighting. Mrs. Croft's cryptic warnings all pointed to a truth hidden in plain sight. In St. Mary Mead, she had once solved a disappearance by noticing a single glove left on a bench, a clue to a staged escape. Here, she felt, the answer lay in the details, the small, human frailties that betrayed the heart's secrets. The wedding day, meant for joy, had become a stage for mystery, and Miss Marple was determined to uncover its script, one careful stitch at a time. Chapter 5. Whispers of the past. The atmosphere at Willowbrook Manor had grown taut as a drawn bowstring by midday. The bright promise of Emily Hargrove's wedding day eclipsed by her inexplicable absence. The grand hall, once alive with the hum of anticipation, now echoed with the low murmurs of anxious guests and the clipped commands of Inspector Hale, who had set up a makeshift headquarters in the library. Miss Jane Marple, seated in a quiet corner of the drawing room with her knitting, observed the unfolding chaos with her characteristic calm, her pale blue eyes missing nothing. The rose petal, the scrawled note reading midnight, the folded gown, and the missing pearl necklace, these were the threads of a tapestry she was determined to unravel. And she sensed the past held the key to the present mystery. Inspector Hale, his notebook bristling with hasty scrawls, began his interviews with the household, his brusque manner doing little to soothe frayed nerves. Sir Reginald Hargrove, still reeling from shock, sat heavily in an armchair, his face a mask of disbelief as he muttered about his daughter's devotion to Richard. She wouldn't run off, he insisted, his voice thick with emotion. Emily's a good girl, obedient. This is some cruel trick. Miss Marple, her needles clicking softly, noted the tremor in his hands, the way his eyes avoided the portrait of his late wife, Margaret, hanging above the fireplace. The resemblance to Emily was striking, the same delicate features, the same pale hair, yet the portrait's eyes held a spark of defiance that Emily's lacked. Miss Marple recalled Lady Beatrice's tale of Margaret's disappearance, the shawl by the river, the burned letter. In St. Mary Mead, she had once solved a theft by noting a widow's reluctance to meet her husband's gaze in an old photograph. Sir Reginald's avoidance, she thought, was no less telling. The inspector moved on to Clara Jenkins, Emily's maid, who stood by the window, her hands twisting her apron. "I told you, sir," Clara said, her voice unsteady. "I left Miss Emily in her room last night, brushing her hair. She was quiet, but she seemed content. I didn't hear anything after that, no footsteps, no cries." Miss Marple's eyes flicked to Clara's hands, noting the raw redness around her knuckles, as if she'd been scrubbing them fiercely. "And the necklace, Clara?" Miss Marple asked gently, her tone disarming. "Did you see it when you left her?" Clara hesitated, her eyes darting to the floor. "Yes, miss. It was on the dresser, in its box. She always took it off at night." Inspector Hale frowned, scribbling a note. "And you're sure she didn't mention any plans? No visitors, no letters?" "None, sir," Clara said, but her voice wavered, and Miss Marple caught the fleeting glance she cast toward the door, where Mrs. Agatha Croft stood, her sharp features set in a scowl. Mrs. Croft was next, her answers curt and precise. "Emily was overwrought," she said, her hands folded tightly in her lap. "Brides often are. She probably took a walk to clear her head and lost her way. The necklace, stolen, no doubt, by some opportunist." Miss Marple tilted her head, her knitting pausing. "Stolen, Mrs. Croft." Yet the room was undisturbed, the gown neatly folded. "A thief would hardly take such care, don't you think?" Mrs. Croft's lips thinned, but she offered no reply, her eyes narrowing as if measuring Miss Marple's intent. The inspector, impatient, turned to Richard Thornton, who paced the room like a caged animal. "I've told you, Hale," Richard said, his voice sharp. "Emily was happy, excited for today. She had no reason to leave me. And yet," Inspector Hale said, tapping his pencil, "she's gone, and with a valuable necklace, Any enemies, Mr. Thornton? Anyone who'd wish to disrupt your wedding?" Richard's jaw tightened, but he shook his head. "None. My work in London keeps me busy, but it's all contracts and wills nothing to provoke this." Miss Marple, her needles resuming their rhythm, noted the slight flush in Richard's cheeks, the way his fingers brushed a cufflink, a silver one, engraved with a crest. She recalled a similar cufflink glimpsed in St. Mary Mead, dropped by a solicitor who'd been too quick to deny his debts. Richard's denial, she thought, had a similar ring of rehearsal. Victor Langford, the last to be questioned, lounged against a bookcase, his usual charm tempered by a wary edge. "I've nothing new to add," he said, his smile tight. "I saw Emily in the corridor around 10, as I told Miss Marple. She seemed distracted, but that's all. I went to bed after a brandy." "With Richard in your shoes, Mr. Langford," Miss Marple said, her voice mild as milk. "I couldn't help noticing a bit of mud on them yesterday. An evening stroll, perhaps." Victor's smile faltered, his hand brushing his trouser leg as if to check. "Mud? Oh, I might have stepped outside for a cigarette. The gardens are lovely at night." Miss Marple nodded, her expression serene, but her mind filed away his unease. Mud at night, a cry, a rose petal, these were not random. She thought of a gardener in St. Mary Mead, whose muddy boots had led to a hidden cache of stolen silver. His nighttime walks a cover for theft. As the interviews concluded, Inspector Hale announced a broader search, calling for volunteers to scour the village and nearby woods. Miss Marple, declining to join, requested permission to remain in the manor, citing her age and a desire to think things over. In truth, she wished to explore the house, to seek the small details that others overlooked. She began in the library, where the fire still smouldered, its embers casting a warm glow. On a side table, she found a guest book from the previous evening's toast, its pages filled with well wishes. One entry, in a looping hand, caught her eye, to Emily. "May your happiness bloom like the roses of Willowbrook." No signature, only a small sketch of a rose. She tucked the detail away, her mind returning to the petal on the sill, slipping into the hall. Miss Marple moved toward the staircase, her steps silent on the thick carpet. She paused at a portrait of Margaret Hargrove, noting again the defiant spark in her eyes. Below the frame, a small brass plaque read, "Margaret, beloved wife, lost to us too soon." Miss Marple's fingers brushed the plaque, her thoughts drifting to Lady Beatrice's mention of a burned letter in St. Mary Mead. A burned receipt had once revealed a shopkeeper's fraud, its ashes yielding a partial date. Could Margaret's letter hold a similar clue? Ascending to the second floor, Miss Marple passed Emily's room, now cordoned off by the inspector's orders, and continued to a narrow corridor leading to the servants' quarters. Here, she encountered Clara, emerging from a small room with a bundle of linens. The girl started, nearly dropping her load. "Oh, Miss Marple, I was just tidying up." "Of course," Miss Marple said, her smile reassuring. "You must be so worried about Emily. Tell me, Clara, did she ever speak of her mother? It must have been hard, growing up without her." Clara's eyes filled with tears, and she nodded. "She did, miss. Miss Emily used to say she felt her mother's presence like a shadow. She'd ask me about the stories about the man they said her mother ran off with. I told her it was just gossip, but she'd get so quiet, staring at that necklace, miss." Marple's heart quickened, but her voice remained gentle. "The necklace, yes, it's very beautiful. Did Emily ever open it, perhaps? Some heirlooms have compartments, you know." Clara shook her head, but her hesitation was palpable. "Not that I saw, Miss, but she'd hold it sometimes, like it was heavy. I thought it was just her missing her mother." Miss Marple thanked her, letting her go, but her mind was racing. The necklace, the burned letter, the rose petal, the creage pointed to a secret rooted in Margaret's fate. She recalled a case in St. Mary Mead, where a locket's hidden compartment had held a love note, exposing a betrayal. Could Emily have discovered something in the necklace, something that prompted her flight? Returning to the drawing room, Miss Marple found Lady Beatrice, her face drawn with worry. "Jane, they've found nothing," she said, her voice trembling. "The village, the woods empty. It's as if she's vanished into thin air, like Margaret." Miss Marple patted her hand, her mind turning to the past. "Beatrice, tell me more about Margaret's disappearance. You mentioned rumors of a lover. Was there a name, perhaps?" Lady Beatrice hesitated, glancing toward the door. "There was talk of a man named Victor Langford, Victor's uncle. He was a painter, a bit of a rogue. He left Willowbrook soon after Margaret vanished, and some said he'd gone with her. Reginald was furious, swore he'd never speak his name again." Miss Marple's needles paused, her mind latching onto the name. Elias Langford, uncle, the mud on Victor's shoes, his late-night sighting of Emily, his unease, all took on a new weight. She thought of a St. Mary Mead artist whose sketches had hidden coded messages for a lover. Could Victor be guarding a family secret, one tied to the necklace and Emily's disappearance? As evening fell, the manor grew quiet, the search parties exhausted. Inspector Hale, frustrated, clung to his elopement theory, but Miss Marple's thoughts were elsewhere. The note, the petal, the necklace, they suggested a plan, not a whim. She sat by her window, gazing at the river's silver gleam, her knitting, a steady rhythm. In St. Mary Mead, she had learned that the past never stayed. Buried it reached out, like roots beneath a garden, to trip the unwary. Emily's absence, she felt, was no simple flight, but a thread in a larger pattern, one woven with betrayal, secrets, and perhaps murder. She would follow that thread, she resolved, one careful stitch at a time. Chapter 6. The Hidden Letter. The afternoon sun hung low over Willowbrook Manor, casting elongated shadows across the lawns as search parties combed the grounds with increasing desperation. Emily Hargrove's disappearance had transformed the estate, from a venue of celebration into a scene of grim investigation, with Inspector Hale directing his men like a conductor leading a somber symphony. Miss Jane Marple, having excused herself from the formal interrogations, wandered the gardens under the pretense of seeking fresh air, her knitting bag slung over her arm. She knew that clues often revealed themselves in the quiet corners overlooked by official scrutiny, much like the misplaced glove that had once exposed a poacher in St. Mary Mead, the riverbank where Margaret Hargrove's shawl had been found. Years ago, drew her attention. The water lapped gently at the reeds, its surface deceptively calm. Miss Marple's sharp eyes scanned the muddy edge, noting footprints several sets, fresh and overlapping, likely from the morning search. But among them, a smaller print caught her notice, delicate and pointed, as if made by a woman's shoe. She bent to examine it, her fingers brushing the damp earth. Nearby, half buried in the mud, a scrap of paper fluttered, torn and water-stained. She retrieved it carefully, unfolding it to reveal fragmented words in a bold, slanting hand. "Meet me at midnight, or all is lost." The address, partially visible, read, "My dearest Emily." Miss Marple's pulse quickened, though her expression remained composed. She tucked the fragment into her handkerchief, alongside the rose petals and the midnight note from Emily's room. This was no coincidence, she thought, recalling a blackmail letter in St. Mary Mead that had driven a young clerk to desperation, its words similarly ominous. Returning to the manor, she sought out Inspector Hale in the library, where he pored over a map of the estate. "Inspector," she said, her voice mild as she presented the scrap. "I found this by the river. It seems addressed to Emily." Hale's mustache twitched as he examined the paper, his eyes narrowing. "A rendezvous note. This changes things. If she met someone at midnight, it could be abduction or worse. The handwriting doesn't match anyone here." Miss Marple shook her head. "Not that I've seen, but consider, Inspector, the paper is torn, as if discarded in haste, and the footprints nearby small, feminine. Perhaps not a meeting forced upon her, but one she arranged herself." Hale grunted, skeptical. Staging her own disappearance. Why? She had everything, a wedding, a fortune. "People stage things for many reasons," Miss Marple replied, her needles clicking as she settled into a chair. "Fear, secrets, a desire to escape. In my village, a girl once faked a theft to avoid a marriage her father pushed upon her. The clues were deliberate, meant to mislead." Before Hale could respond, a villager burst into the room, hat in hand, breathless from his run. "Inspector, I saw her, Miss Emily, that is, last evening, at the station. She boarded the London train, alone, looking furtive. Wore a grey cloak, but I'd know that pale hair anywhere." The room fell silent, then erupted in questions. Sir Reginald, who had entered behind the man, clutched the doorframe, his face ashen. "London. But why? She was here, in her room." Richard Thornton, pale and tense, stepped forward. "It must be a mistake. Emily wouldn't leave without a word." "What time was this sighting?" "Around 8, sir," the villager said. "Train left at past." Miss Marple's mind word, piecing the timeline. Emily had retired at 9, according to Clara, and Victor claimed to have seen her in the corridor at 10. If the sighting was at 8, it predated her supposed bedtime by an hour. Impossible for one person to be in two places. Unless, she thought, there was a double involved. A deception reminiscent of a stage actress in St. Mary Mead, who'd impersonated her sister to claim an inheritance. "Inspector." Hale dispatched a constable to verify the sighting, then turned to Richard. "Mr. Thornton, did Emily have any connections in London? A friend, perhaps, who could aid in such a scheme?" Richard hesitated, his eyes meeting Miss Marple's briefly. "She visited occasionally, for shopping, but nothing secretive. I feared she had doubts about us. Lately, she's been melancholy, distant. I thought it was nerves, but perhaps she couldn't go through with it." Miss Marple noted the confession, delivered with a touch of reluctance, as if rehearsed. She recalled a suitor in St. Mary Mead who'd confessed minor flaws to mask greater ones. Richard's words rang true on the surface, but beneath lay a current of something unspoken. Lady Beatrice, wringing her hands, interjected. "Jane, what do you make of it? A double. It sounds like one of those dreadful novels." "Not so dreadful, Beatrice," Miss Marple said, her tone soothing. "People resemble each other more often than we think. In my village, 2 cousins looked so alike they fooled the postman for weeks. If someone impersonated Emily at the station, it creates an alibi, a diversion." Mrs. Agatha Croft, who had been listening from the doorway, snorted. Diversion. This is all speculation. The girl ran off, necklace and all, to avoid her duties. Reginald's will stipulates her inheritance upon marriage. Without it, she gets nothing until his death. Sir Reginald's eyes flashed. Agatha, how dare you suggest it's fact? Mrs. Croft cut in, her voice icy. Margaret knew it too. That's why she stayed as long as she did, despite everything. The room tensed, the mention of Margaret hanging like a pall. Miss Marple gaze shifted to Victor Langford, who lingered by the window, his face unreadable. Mr. Langford, she said, her voice casual, you mentioned seeing Emily at 10. Did she wear a grey cloak, by chance? Victor blinked, his charm slipping for a moment. No cloak, just her evening dress. Why? Just wondering. Miss Marple replied, her needles flying. The discrepancy deepened the puzzle. A sighting at 8, a retirement at 9, a corridor glimpse at 10, and the letter fragment, torn and discarded by whom? She thought of Elias Langford, Victor's uncle, rumoured lover of Margaret. Could Victor be protecting a family legacy or exploiting it? As the constable returned, confirming the villagers' story, a woman matching Emily's description had indeed boarded the train. Hale's abduction theory wavered. If she left willingly at 8, why the midnight note? And the open window, the folded gown. Precisely, Miss Marple murmured. It's all too neat, too conflicting, like a jigsaw with pieces from different boxes. Richard, distraught, excused himself, muttering about telephoning London contacts. Miss Marple watched him go, noting the stiffness in his stride. Alone with Lady Beatrice, she confided, Beatrice, I suspect the train woman was a decoy, hired to confuse the timeline. The real Emily vanished later, after Victor's sighting. But who would hire such a person? Lady Beatrice whispered. Someone who benefits from the confusion, Miss Marple said. Or someone hiding a deeper truth. Tell me, was Elias Langford ever seen with Margaret near the river? Beatrice nodded. Once, by a poacher. They argued, then he left. After her disappearance, he vanished, too. Miss Marple's mind connected the dots. Elias, the river, the letter. Perhaps the fragment wasn't for Emily, but echoed an older message, repurposed to mislead. In St. Mary Mead, a forged note had nearly ruined a reputation until the ink's age betrayed it. She resolved to examine the scrap more closely, perhaps under light to reveal faded marks as dusk fell. The manor settled into uneasy quiet, the search suspended until dawn. Miss Marple sat by her window, the letter fragment in hand, her knitting. Forgotten, the river gleamed below, holding its secrets. The twist of the double, the conflicting times, it all pointed to orchestration, not accident. Emily, she felt, was caught in a web spun from her mother's past, and the spider was among them, waiting. She would tease out the threads, she decided, one subtle inquiry at a time. Chapter 7. Secrets in the attic twilight enveloped Willowbrook Manor like a shroud, the fading light filtering through the tall windows to cast flickering patterns on the walls. The household, exhausted from the day's futile searches and interrogations, moved with a subdued air, their conversations hushed as if fearing to awaken further calamity. Miss Jane Marple, undeterred by the growing despondency, felt a quiet resolve stirring within her. The conflicting clues, the torn letter fragment by the river, the train sighting that defied the timeline, the missing pearl necklace suggested a deception layered upon deception, and she suspected the manor's hidden corners held answers. With a polite excuse about retrieving a misplaced shawl, she slipped away from the drawing room and ascended the narrow back staircase toward the attic, her sensible shoes treading lightly on the creaking steps. The attic was a vast, dimly lit space, its rafters draped in cobwebs, and its floor cluttered with forgotten relics of the Hargrove family's past. Dust motes danced in the slanting beams from a small dormer window, and the air carried the musty scent of aged paper and mothballs. Miss Marple moved carefully among the stacks of trunks and crates, her eyes adjusting to the gloom. She recalled an attic in St. Mary Mead, where a dusty ledger had revealed a vicar's embezzlement, its pages yellowed but the truth indelible. Here, she hoped, similar revelations awaited. Her attention was drawn to a cluster of old trunks bearing the initials M.H. Margaret Hargrove. The dust on their lids was disturbed, faint fingerprints marring the surface, as if someone had rifled through them recently. Miss Marple knelt, her joints protesting slightly, and lifted the lid of the largest trunk. Inside lay a trove of women's clothing, faded gowns, silk scarves, and a collection of personal items that spoke of a life abruptly halted. At the bottom, beneath a layer of tissue paper, she found a small, leather-bound diary, its pages edged in gold, with delicate fingers. Miss Marple opened the diary, scanning the elegant script. The entries began innocuously, detailing daily life at Willowbrook, but soon took a more intimate turn. Elias came again today. One passage read, dated several months before Margaret's disappearance. His eyes hold such fire, such understanding. Reginald suspects nothing, but I fear the day he learns of our meetings. Another entry, weeks later, we argued by the river. Elias begs me to leave, to start anew, but the necklace is secret. It guards binds me here. If only I could trust him fully. The diary hinted at an affair, passionate and fraught, with Elias Langford, the painter who had vanished shortly after Margaret, but Miss Marple's mind raced, connecting the name to Victor. Langford, Elias's nephew. The mud on Victor's shoes, his unease during questioning, his late-night sighting of Emily, all suggested involvement, perhaps in protecting a family scandal or exploiting it. She closed the diary, tucking it into her knitting bag, and examined the trunk further. A small box held letters, some burned at the edges, as if an attempt to destroy them had been interrupted. One surviving fragment echoed the torn note by the river. Meet me, midnight, all is lost. The handwriting matched the diarist Margaret's own. Rising, Miss Marple noted fresh scuff marks on the floor, leading to another trunk. This one contained men's clothing, outdated but well preserved, including a coat with a monogrammed cufflinky, L. Elias Langford's, perhaps left behind in haste. The dust here, too, was recently disturbed, and a faint footprint small, like a woman's in the floorboards. Clara Jenkins, she thought, with her anxious glances and raw hands, might have been here, seeking or hiding something, descending from the attic. Miss Marple encountered Victor Langford in the upper hall, his face flushed as if from exertion. Miss Marple, he said, his charm forced. Exploring the house. It's full of old ghosts, isn't it? Indeed, Mr. Langford, she replied, her tone mild. Ghosts and secrets. I found some interesting items in the attic your Uncle Elias's things. Among them, he was close to Margaret Hargrove, wasn't he? Victor's smile faltered, a bead of sweat appearing on his brow despite the cool air. Uncle Elias, ancient history. He was a wanderer, left years ago. I barely knew him. Miss Marple's eyes twinkled. Behind her spectacles, yet his name lingers in the diary I found. An affair, it seems, and a secret tied to the pearl necklace. Emily might have discovered it, don't you think? Perhaps that's why she vanished, to escape the same fate as her mother. Victor swallowed, his hands clenching. Diary, you're imagining. Things, Miss Marple. Margaret drowned. Tragic accident. No secrets there. Accidents leave traces, Miss Marple said softly, like mud on shoes or torn letters by the river. You were out that night, weren't you? And the train's sighting too early for Emily, unless someone impersonated her. Victor's face paled, but he recovered with a laugh. You're quite the detective, but you're wrong. I had nothing to do with it. He hurried away, his footsteps echoing down the stairs. Miss Marple watched him go, her mind weaving the new clues into the pattern. The diary confirmed the affair, the necklace's secret, perhaps a hidden compartment holding proof of Ilias's involvement. But who had disturbed the attic? And why now? In the kitchen, she found Clara Jenkins, her eyes red from crying, peeling vegetables with mechanical motions. Clara, Miss Marple said gently, settling on a stool. You've been troubled, perhaps. You've seen things in the attic, Margaret's things. Clara dropped her knife, her face crumpling. How did you know, Miss Say? Went up there yesterday, looking for something Miss Emily asked about. She wanted her mother's letters, said they held the truth about her disappearance. And did you find them? Miss Marple prompted. Clara nodded, tears flowing. Some, but they were burned. Miss Emily read one, then she was scared. Said it changed everything. That's when she started acting strange. Miss Marple patted her hand. Village maids know so much, like young Elsie in St. Mary Mead, who hid her mistress's letters from a jealous husband. Did Emily confide in you, Clara, about a plan? Perhaps. Clara hesitated, then whispered she mentioned meeting someone at midnight to learn more. But she swore me to secrecy. Oh, miss, what if she's in danger? Before Miss Marple could reply, Inspector Hale entered, his face grim. A development, a telegram from London. The woman on the train was seen at a hotel, but when my man arrived, she was gone. Looked like Emily, but a stranger. Hired, perhaps. Miss Marple nodded, the pieces aligning. The impersonator created a false trail, allowing the real abductionist later, but the diary added a twist. If Emily had learned of her mother's affair, and perhaps Sir Reginald's role in her fate, she might have confronted someone, leading to her vanishing. Gathering in the drawing room. Miss Marple shared the diary's contents with Lady Beatrice, who gasped. Elias and Margaret's true, then. But Victor, he was just a boy then. Boys grow into men with loyalties, Miss Marple said, knitting thoughtfully, and secrets fester. Clara vanished briefly, today perhaps to warn someone. As night fell, Miss Marple sat by the fire, the diary open in her lap. The affair, the necklace, the midnight meeting, it all echoed Margaret's story. But a new thought emerged. What if Elias hadn't fled with Margaret, but been silenced by her? Or by Reginald, in jealousy? The burned letters suggested destruction of evidence. A soft knock interrupted her. Clara, her face pale. Miss, I found this in the attic after you left. She handed over a small key, engraved with a pearl motif. It might fit the necklace. Miss Marple's eyes lit. The key to the compartment, perhaps holding the final proof. But as she took it, a distant cry echoed from the garden's familiar, chilling. Clara gasped. That's like the one I heard the night Miss Emily disappeared. Miss Marple rose, her resolve firm. The attic's secrets had illuminated the past, But the present mystery deepened. Emily, she sensed, was alive, hidden, waiting for the truth to emerge. She would pursue it, unraveling the threads of betrayal and love, one stitch at a time. Chapter 8. The Midnight Rendezvous. The night settled over Willowbrook Manor with a heavy silence, broken only by the occasional hoot of an owl and the distant murmur of the river. Inside, the household remained on edge, the weight of Emily Hargrove's disappearance pressing upon every conversation, every glance. Miss Jane Marple, seated by the fire in her guest room, turned the small pearl motif key over in her fingers, its delicate engravings catching the lamplight. Clara's revelation about the key, coupled with the chilling cry from the gardens, had sharpened her focus. The attics, secrets, Margaret's diary, the burned letters. The cufflink had drawn a thread from the past to the present, and Miss Marple sensed the midnight rendezvous note was the knot tying them together. She had not shared the key's discovery with Inspector Hale, preferring to hold her cards close, as she had in St. Mary Mead when a hidden diary revealed a shopkeeper's double life. The cry, echoing the one she'd heard on her first night, suggested urgency, a signal, perhaps, or a warning. Rising, she slipped the key into her knitting bag and donned her shawl, resolved to investigate the gardens before the household stirred. The manor's clocks chimed 11, and she moved quietly down the back staircase, her steps as soft as a cat's. The gardens were bathed in moonlight, the air crisp with the scent of damp earth and fading flowers. Miss Marple followed the path to the river, her eyes scanning for signs of disturbance. Near the stone bench where she'd found the rose petal, a narrow trail led to a small foliar decorative pavilion half hidden by ivy. Its latticework cast eerie shadows, and as she approached, she noticed a faint glow within, as if from a shielded lantern. Her heart quickened, but her expression remained serene, recalling a night in St. Mary Mead when a lantern's flicker had led her to a poacher's cache. Inside the folly, she found no one, but the evidence was telling. A cigarette stub, its tip stained with lipstick, lay on the stone floor, alongside a crumpled handkerchief embroidered with the initial E. Emily didn't smoke, Miss Marple knew, nor had she seen her with such a handkerchief. The lipstick shade vivid crimson was unlike the soft pinks Emily favored. Kneeling carefully, she retrieved both items, wrapping them in her handkerchief. The cigarette suggested a meeting, the handkerchief a clue or a plant. She recalled a case where a dropped scarf, embroidered with a false initial, had misled a constable until the stitching betrayed its owner. Returning to the manor, Miss Marple encountered Mrs. Agatha Croft in the hall, her sharp features illuminated by a single candle. "Miss Marple," Mrs. Croft said, her voice cold, "out so late. The gardens are hardly safe at night." "An old woman's insomnia," Miss Marple replied, her tone mild. "I thought a walk might clear my head. But I did wonder about Emily's necklace. You seemed concerned about it at dinner. Does it hold something beyond pearls?" Mrs. Croft's eyes narrowed, her candle trembling slightly. "It's a family heirloom, nothing more. But Emily was foolish to wear it so openly. It's worth a fortune. I warned Reginald it could attract trouble." "Trouble indeed," Miss Marple said, her needles clicking as she resumed her knitting in the drawing room. "In my village, a stolen ring once held a hidden compartment with a lover's note. Could the necklace have such a secret?" Mrs. Croft stiffened, her lips a thin line. "You're fanciful, Miss Marple. It's just jewelry." She turned abruptly, her candle casting wild shadows as she left. Miss Marple's mind turned to the key. If it fit a compartment in the necklace, It might hold proof of Margaret's affair worse. She recalled Clara's mention of Emily's fear after reading a letter, and the diary's hint of a secret binding Margaret to the manor. The cigarette stub suggested a woman's presence in the folly, but whose? Mrs. Croft's defensiveness, Victor's unease. Richard's rehearsed grieful pointed to hidden motives. At breakfast, Inspector Hale announced a new lead. A gardener had found a trail of footprints leading from Emily's window to the folly, small and delicate, matching the one by the river. "It's clear now," Hale said, his moustache bristling. "She climbed out, met someone, and either fled or was taken." The cigarette suggests a woman was involved. Miss Marple, sipping tea, interjected gently, "Or planted, Inspector. The lipstick is bold, unlike Emily's style, and the handkerchief, could be anyone. In St. Mary Mead, a dropped glove once led us astray until we traced its owner's seamstress." Hale frowned, but nodded. "We'll test the cigarette for prints. Meanwhile, I'm sending men to the folly." As the household dispersed, Miss Marple sought out Lady Beatrice, who sat pale and trembling in the conservatory. "Jane, it's too much like Margaret," she whispered. "The river, the footprints, it's as if history repeats itself." "Not quite," Miss Marple said, her voice soothing. "Margaret's shawl was found, but no footprints. Emily's trail is deliberate, staged perhaps. Tell me, Beatrice, was the necklace ever examined after Margaret's disappearance?" Beatrice shook her head. "Reginald locked it away, said it was too painful. Emily only wore it because he insisted, for the wedding." Miss Marple nodded, the key in her bag. Feeling heavier, she excused herself and slipped into Emily's room, now unguarded as the search focused elsewhere. The empty velvet box on the dresser caught her eye, and she examined it closely, noting a faint scratch on its hinge, as if forced open. The key, she suspected, might unlock more than a compartment hit, might unlock the truth. Returning to the drawing room, she overheard Richard and Victor in a heated exchange outside. "You're pushing too hard," Richard hissed. "Let it lie, or we're both ruined." "It's too late," Victor snapped. "She knew too much." "You saw her with that letter?" Miss Marple's needles paused, her heart quickening. "The letter perhaps, the one Clara mentioned, or another tied to the necklace." She recalled the St. Mary Mead scandal, where a whispered argument had revealed a blackmailer's scheme. Richard and Victor, she thought, were entangled in something deeper than a missing bride. As noon approached, a shocking discovery appended the investigation. Sir Reginald, inspecting the family safe, found the pearl necklace, or so he thought. Closer examination revealed it as a clever fake. It's pearl's glass. It's clasped, cheaply made. "It's a fraud," he roared, clutching the imitation. "The real one's gone with Emily." Miss Marple's eyes gleamed. The switch was no theft but a calculated move, like the swapped jewels in St. Mary Mead that had funded a secret escape. "Curious," she said to Hale. "A thief would take the real necklace and leave nothing." This suggests someone wanted the absence noticed later. Hale rubbed his chin. "You're saying it's part of the staging, but why?" "To mislead," Miss Marple replied, "or to protect the real necklace's secret. In my village, a swapped painting hid a stolen will. We must find where Emily went after midnight. The cry, the cigarette, the fake necklace. The key tool wove a pattern of deception, with Margaret's shadow at its heart." Miss Marple sat by the fire, her knitting steady, her mind racing. The folly was a stage, the rendezvous a lure, but for whom? Emily, she felt, had uncovered something in her mother's past, prompting a desperate act. The truth, like the river's hidden depths, was close. She would find it, one careful stitch at a time. Chapter 9. The Imposter's Shadow. The revelation of the fake pearl necklace sent ripples of shock through Willowbrook Manor, stirring the already tense household into a frenzy of suspicion and accusation. By late afternoon, the grand hall buzzed with whispered conjectures, while Inspector Hale, his notebook now a chaotic scrawl, struggled to maintain order. Miss Jane Marple, seated in a quiet alcove with her knitting, observed the turmoil with her usual calm, her pale blue eyes darting from face to face. The cigarette stub with its crimson lipstick, the pearl motif key, the torn letter fragment, and now the switched necklace formed a pattern of deliberate deception, and she sensed the answer lay not in the clamour, but in the subtle inconsistencies of human behaviour. Inspector Hale, his patience fraying, gathered the household in the drawing room to review the evidence. "The necklace switch complicates things," he declared, holding up the glass imitation, its cheap luster mocking the room's opulence. "Someone wanted us to think it was stolen, but why? And the woman on the train seen at 8, when Emily was supposedly here, suggests a planned distraction." Miss Marple, her needles clicking softly, nodded. "A distraction, indeed, Inspector. In St. Mary Mead, a staged theft once diverted attention from a forged will. The train sighting, timed before Emily's retirement, points to an impersonator hired to confuse the timeline." Hale's moustache twitched, his skepticism evident. Hired by whom? And for what purpose? If Emily fled, why the fake necklace? If she was taken, why no ransom? "Those are the questions," Miss Marple said, her voice mild but firm. "But consider the necklace's secret. Mrs. Croft hinted it held something valuable, perhaps not just pearls, but proof of an old truth, one Emily discovered." Sir Reginald Hargrove, his face mottled with anger and grief, slammed his fist on the table. "Enough of this nonsense. My daughter's been taken, and you're all chasing shadows. That necklace was Margaret Sitt's, priceless, but it's just jewellery." Miss Marple's eyes flicked to Mrs. Agatha Croft, whose lips pursed tightly at the outburst. Her silence, Miss Marple noted, was as telling as her earlier defensiveness. Richard Thornton, pacing by the window, looked haggard, his earlier composure crumbling. "Emily wouldn't leave me," he muttered, more to himself than the room. "She was afraid of something, someone, but she loved me." Victor Langford, leaning against the mantel, offered a strained smile. "Let's not leap to melodrama, Richard. Emily might have panicked, run off to think things over. Women do, you know." Miss Marple's gaze lingered on Victor, recalling his Uncle Ilias's affair with Margaret, detailed in the attic diary. His casual dismissal, she thought, masked a deeper unease. Like the curate in St. Mary Mead, who'd laughed off a theft until his own ledger betrayed him. "Mr. Langford," she said, her tone deceptively casual, "you mentioned seeing Emily at 10. Did she carry anything, a letter, perhaps, or a handkerchief?" Victor blinked, his fingers tightening on his glass. "Nothing I noticed, just her in her evening dress, looking distracted." Before Miss Marple could press further, a footman entered with a telegram, handed to Inspector Hale. The room stilled as he read aloud. "Woman resembling Emily Hargrove, seen at Hotel Clarendon. London, last night. Left before police arrived. Staff confirm grey cloak, pale hair." Hale's eyes narrowed. "It's her or someone meant to look like her." Richard lunged forward, his voice hoarse. "I'll go to London myself. She's there, I know it." Marple raised a hand, her voice gentle but commanding. Mr. Thornton, a moment. If this woman was Emily, she left hours before her supposed disappearance. If not, we're dealing with a calculated ruse. In my village, a lookalike once fooled a bank clerk to cover a theft. We must learn who paid this woman. Hale nodded, dispatching a constable to investigate the hotel. Miss Marple, meanwhile, slipped away to the garden, where she'd last seen Clara Jenkins, Emily's maid, whose tearful confession about the attic letters lingered in her mind. The folly, where she'd found the cigarette stub and handkerchief, drew her again. Under daylight, she noticed a faint scratch on the stone bench, as if something metal a-clasp perhaps had grazed it. The handkerchief's she realized, could belong to anyone, Emily, Elias, or even an unknown player. Returning to the manor, she sought out Clara, finding her in the servants' hall, folding linens with trembling hands. "Clara," Miss Marple said softly, "you mentioned Emily's fear after reading a letter. Did she say who wrote it, or what it contained?" Clara's eyes darted to the door, her voice a whisper. She wouldn't say miss, but she was shaking. Said it was about her mother, something awful. She kept touching that necklace, like it burned her. Miss Marple nodded, the pearl motif key in her bag a silent weight. "And the midnight meeting, did she name the person?" Clara shook her head, tears spilling. "No, Miss. She just said she had to know the truth, no matter the cost." As Miss Marple thanked her, a gardener approached, his face grim. "Miss, I saw something odd last night, near the river. Mrs. Croft, she was out there, carrying a bundle looked like clothes. Didn't think much of it till now." Miss Marple's heart quickened, recalling Mrs. Croft's sharp words about the necklace. "Thank you," she said, her mind racing. In St. Mary Mead, a bundle of clothes had once hidden stolen goods, discarded to mislead. Could Mrs. Croft be concealing evidence, or planting it? Back in the drawing room, Miss Marple shared the gardener's sighting with Lady Beatrice, who gasped, "Agatha, but why? She's devoted to Reginald, to the family's honor." "Devotion can hide many motives," Miss Marple said, her needle steady. "In my village, a housekeeper once burned a will to protect her master's name, only to hide her own theft. Mrs. Croft knows more about that necklace than she admits." As evening deepened, Richard returned from a fruitless call to London, his face etched with despair. "The hotel staff confirmed it wasn't Emily," he said. "A woman, hired anonymously, paid to check in under her name. She vanished before dawn." Miss Marple's eyes gleamed. The impersonator was a decoy, as she'd suspected, but the bundle by the river suggested a second layer of deceit. She recalled the diary's hint of Margaret's fear, the burned letters, Ilias's flight. A new twist emerged. Clara, in a whispered aside, revealed Emily's secret engagement years ago to Richard's late brother, Thomas, killed in a hunting accident. She never spoke of it, Clara said, but she kept his ring hidden. She said it made her doubt everything. Miss Marple's mind spun. Thomas's death, ruled an accident, now seemed shadowed by Margaret's fate. Had Emily uncovered a connection, a betrayal, perhaps, or a cover-up? The necklace, the key, the midnight note all pointed to a truth buried in the past. One someone was desperate to keep hidden. As rain began to patter against the windows, Miss Marple sat by the fire, the key in her hand. The impostor's shadow loomed large, but the real danger, she felt, was closer within the manor's walls. The cry, the bundle, the fake necklace, they were threads in a web of lies. and she would unravel them, one careful stitch at a time. Chapter 10. Gathering storm rain lashed against the windows of Willowbrook Manor, the storm's ferocity mirroring the turmoil within its walls. The discovery of the hired impostor in London and Mrs. Croft's mysterious bundle by the river had deepened the mystery of Emily Hargrove's disappearance, casting a pall over the household. Miss Jane Marple, seated in the library with her knitting, listened to the wind's mournful howl, her mind weaving together the tangled threads of clues, the pearl motif key, the cigarette stub with crimson lipstick, the torn letter, and Clara's revelation about Emily's secret engagement to Richard Thornton's late brother, Thomas. Each pointed to a truth buried in the shadows of Margaret Hargrove's fate, and Miss Marple sensed the storm was not only outside, but gathering among the manor's inhabitants. Inspector Hale, his patience worn thin, assembled the key players. In the library, the fire's glow casting flickering shadows on the book-lined walls. Sir Reginald Hargrove sat heavily, his eyes bloodshot, clutching a glass of brandy. Richard Thornton stood by the window, his face taut with strain, while Victor Langford leaned against a bookcase, his usual charm replaced by a guarded stillness. Mrs. Agatha Croft, her posture rigid, surveyed the room like a general awaiting battle. Clara Jenkins hovered near the door, her hands twisting her apron, and Lady Beatrice Thornton sat beside Miss Marple, her fingers nervously twisting her pearl bracelet. Hale paced, his notebook open. "We're no closer to finding Miss Hargrove," he said, his voice sharp. "The fake necklace, the London impostor, the footprints to the foliates, a maze of misdirection. Someone in this room knows more than they're saying." Sir Reginald's head snapped up. "Are you accusing us, Hal? My daughter's gone, and you're wasting time with theories." Miss Marple, her needles clicking rhythmically, interjected gently. "Not theories, Sir Reginald, but facts. The necklace was switched, the impostor hired, and a letter spoke of a midnight meeting. In St. Mary Mead, such deceptions often hid a deeper motive: fear, greed, or revenge. Perhaps Emily learned something that made her a threat." Richard's eyes flashed, his voice hoarse. "A threat?" Emily was gentle, trusting. She wouldn't provoke anyone. Yet she was afraid, Miss Marple said, her tone mild. "Clara told me of her distress after reading a letter, one tied to her mother's past. And her engagement to your brother, Mr. Thornton Thomas's death, was an accident, was it not?" The room stilled, Richard's face paling. "What are you implying?" "Thomas died in a hunting mishap, years ago. Emily mourned him, but that's past." Miss Marple's eyes flickered to Victor, who shifted uncomfortably. "Mr. Langford, your Uncle Elias was linked to Margaret Hargrove. Could Emily have found proof of that affair, perhaps in the necklace's compartment?" Victor's jaw tightened, his smile forced. "You're chasing ghosts, Miss Marple. My uncle's long gone, and Emily had no reason to dig into old scandals." Hale, seizing the moment, turned to Mrs. Croft. "And you, madam, seen by the river with a bundle last night. Care to explain?" Mrs. Croft's lips pursed, her eyes like flint. "I was disposing of old linens, nothing more. This house is full of clutter. You do better to focus on real evidence." Miss Marple tilted her head, her voice soft but probing. "Linens, Mrs. Croft. Yet the gardener described clothes, bundled tightly. In my village, a similar bundle hid stolen letters, meant to be burned. Did your bundle hold something tied to Emily's disappearance?" Mrs. Croft's face reddened, but she held her ground. "Nonsense. You're an old woman with too much imagination." Before Hale could press further, a footman entered, breathless. "Inspector, we found something by the river, a cufflink, silver, with a crest, caught in the reeds." Richard's hand flew to his sleeve, his face blanching as he touched an empty cuff. "That's mine," he stammered. "I lost it weeks ago, during a walk." Miss Marple's eyes narrowed, recalling a St. Mary Mead case, where a dropped button had exposed a liar's alibi. "Weeks ago, Mr. Thornton, yet the cufflink is polished, untarnished. Curious, don't you think?" Hale took the cufflink, examining its intricate crest-a-lion rampant, matching Richard's. "Remaining one? This puts you near the river, Thornton. Care to revise your story?" Richard's voice rose, defensive. "I told you, I lost it. Someone must have found it, planted it, to frame me." Victor stepped forward, his tone sharp. "Enough, Richard. You were out there, weren't you? I saw you, after midnight, near the Folly." The room erupted, Sir Reginald shouting, Mrs. Croft snapping at Victor to hold his tongue. Miss Marple, her knitting steady, watched the chaos, her mind noting the cracks in their facades. Victor's accusation, she thought, was too quick, as if prepared, like the staged quarrel in St. Mary Mead that had diverted suspicion from a thief. As tempers cooled, Clara, trembling, spoke up. "Miss Marple, I found something else in Miss Emily's room, hidden in her diary." She produced a small notebook, its pages filled with Emily's delicate script. She wrote about nightmares, about her mother. She thought Sir Reginald did something to her. Sir Reginald's glass shattered in his hand, brandy spilling. "Lies," he roared. "Margaret drowned. Emily's been fed poison by gossip." Miss Marple took the diary, scanning its entries. "Mother's shawl wasn't lost by accident," Emily had written. "The necklace holds proof, a locket, hidden inside. I must find it, or I'll never be free." Another entry, dated days before. "Thomas's death wasn't what it seemed. Richard knows, but he won't speak." The room fell silent, all eyes on Miss Marple as she closed the diary. "Inspector," she said, "this suggests Emily uncovered a truth about her mother's fate. And perhaps Thomas's, the cufflink, the bundle, the impostor all point to someone desperate to keep that truth buried." Hale nodded, his skepticism softening. "But where's the proof? The necklace is gone, and so is Emily." "Not gone," Miss Marple said, her voice firm. "Hidden, perhaps, or taken. The key Clara found may unlock the necklace's secret. We must search the riverbank again, where the cufflink was found." As Hale organized a new search, Miss Marple lingered, her thoughts on the diary. Emily's fear, her discovery, echoed. Margaret's diary, the affair, the secret, the river. But a twist emerged. A gardener, returning from the search, whispered to Miss Marple of a hidden boathouse, rarely used, near where the cufflink was found. "It's locked, Miss," he said, "but I saw a light there last night, flickering." Miss Marple's heart quickened. In St. Mary Mead, a locked shed had once hidden a runaway, her presence betrayed by a candle's glow. "Thank you," she said, her mind racing. The boathouse, the cufflink, the key, all converged. Emily, she felt, was close, and the storm was about to break, revealing the truth in its lightning flash. She would follow the trail, one careful stitch at a time. Chapter 11. The boathouse revelation. The storm that had battered Willowbrook Manor through the night gave way to a grey, sullen dawn, the air heavy with the scent of rain-soaked earth. The revelation of Emily Hargrove's diary, with its chilling hints of her mother's fate and Thomas Thornton's questionable death, had cast a pall over the household, each member eyeing the others with suspicion. Miss Jane Marple, her knitting bag slung over her arm, stood at the edge of the drawing room, her pale blue eyes scanning the faces of Sir Reginald Hargrove, Richard Thornton, Victor Langford, Mrs. Agatha Croft, and Clara Jenkins, who hovered nervously by the door. The gardener's whisper of a flickering light in the hidden boathouse had ignited a spark in Miss Marple's mind, and she sensed the threads of the mystery, the pearl motif key, the fake necklace, the cigarette stub, the torn letter were converging at the river's edge. Inspector Hale, his face etched with determination, rallied a small party to investigate the boathouse, a neglected structure tucked among willows near the river's bend. Miss Marple, declining to join the trek due to her age, requested to remain close, promising to assist with any discoveries. In truth, she wished to observe the household's reactions, knowing from her St. Mary Mead days that guilt often betrayed itself in a glance or a gesture. As Hale, Richard, and the pair of constables set off, she settled in the conservatory, her needles clicking, her eyes on the others. Sir Reginald, his hands trembling, muttered about the injustice of it all, his voice thick with brandy. "Emily, my girl, caught up in this madness. It's Margaret's curse, I tell you." Mrs. Croft, her lips pursed, snapped, "Enough, Reginald. Your obsession with Margaret's memory fuels this nonsense." Victor, unusually subdued, lingered by the window, his fingers drumming a restless rhythm, while Clara, pale and silent, busied herself with a tray of tea things, her eyes darting toward the garden path. Miss Marple, sipping her tea, addressed Clara softly. "You've been brave, Clara, sharing Emily's diary. In my village, a maid once found a hidden note that saved her mistress from ruin. Did Emily ever mention the boathouse? Perhaps as a place she visited." Clara's hands froze, her cup rattling in its saucer. "No, miss, not directly. But she loved the river, said it felt like her mother's presence. Once, she mentioned a key, said it unlocked more than jewels." Miss Marple nodded, the pearl motif key a silent weight in her bag. She recalled a St. Mary Mead case where a hidden key had opened a locked chest, revealing a will that changed a family's fate. The boathouse, she thought, might hold a similar revelation. The search party returned within the hour, their faces grim but triumphant. Inspector Hale, his coat damped from the drizzle, carried a small bundle wrapped in oilcloth. "We found her," he announced, his voice steady but urgent. "Emily, alive, in the boathouse. Bound, but unharmed. She's being brought back now." The room erupted in gasps and exclamations. Sir Reginald staggered to his feet, tears streaming, while Richard's face twisted with relief and something darker, fear, perhaps. Mrs. Croft's eyes narrowed, her hands clenching, and Victor turned away, his expression unreadable. Clara dropped her tray, a sob escaping her lips. Miss Marple's needles paused, her mind racing. "Bound, you say? Inspector, and the necklace?" Hale unwrapped the oilcloth, revealing the true pearl necklace, its luster unmistakable even in the dim light. On her, safe and sound, but she's shaken, says she was lured to the boathouse at midnight by a note from Richard, then attacked by a masked figure. Richard lunged forward, his voice raw. "A note from me? Impossible. I wrote no such thing." Miss Marple's eyes gleamed behind her spectacles. Yet the note by the river spoke of midnight, addressed to Emily. In St. Mary Mead, a forged letter once lured a man to his ruin, written by someone close. "Inspector, may I see the bonds?" Hale led the group to the hall, where Emily was brought in, supported by a constable. Her pale hair was dishevelled, her gown torn, but her eyes burned with a mix of fear and defiance. The pearl necklace gleamed. At her throat and around her wrists were loose ropes, tied in a slipshod manner. Miss Marple knelt, examining them closely. "Curious," she murmured. "These knots are loose, easily undone, almost as if tied by the captive herself." Emily's eyes widened, a flush rising to her cheeks. I was tied up. The figure came at me after Clara brought the note. Clara gasped, shaking her head. "I never brought a note, Miss, I swear it." Miss Marple's voice remained gentle. "Emily, dear, the truth now. In my village, a girl once staged a theft to escape a marriage she feared. Did you tie these ropes yourself to stage your disappearance?" Emily's resolve crumbled, tears spilling. "I had to," she whispered. "I found Mother's locket in the necklace. It held letters proving she didn't drown. She was murdered by someone. Here, I planned to hide, to force the truth out, but someone attacked me in the boathouse. Someone real." The room stilled, Sir Reginald's face ashen, Mrs. Croft's eyes like steel. Miss Marple produced the pearl motif key, holding it up. "This, I presume, opens the locket. Emily, what did the letters say?" Emily's voice trembled. "They were from Elias Langford, begging Mother to flee with him. She refused, fearing Father's wrath. The last letter said she'd confront him, then she vanished." Victor stepped forward, his face pale. "My uncle, he loved her, yes, but he left after her death. He's no murderer." Miss Marple's gaze shifted to Mrs. Croft, whose hands shook. "Mrs. Croft, you were seen by the river with a bundle. Did you know of these letters? Did you seek to hide them as you hid Margaret's fate?" Mrs. Croft's composure shattered. "I had to protect the family," she cried. "Margaret's affair threatened everything. Reginald's honor, the estate. I followed her that night, argued with her. She fell, hit her head. It was an accident. I hid her in the river, with the shawl to mislead. But Emily found the letters, and I panicked. I lured her to the boathouse to take the necklace." Sir Reginald's roar shook the room. You killed my Margaret." Mrs. Croft sank to her knees, sobbing. "I didn't mean to. It was for you, Reginald." Miss Marple's heart ached, but her voice was firm. "And the cigarette stub, the handkerchief yours, Mrs. Croft, to frame another." Mrs. Croft nodded. Defeated, "I used an old handkerchief of Emily's, hoping to confuse things." Hale signalled his men, who led Mrs. Croft away. Emily clung to Richard, her eyes haunted but resolute. Miss Marple, her knitting resumed, reflected on the tragedy. In St. Mary Mead, a hidden truth had once freed a family from guilt. Here, it had broken one apart, but Emily was safe, the locket's secret revealed. As the storm cleared, Miss Marple sat by the window, the river gleaming below. The boathouse had yielded its truth, but one thread remained loose, Richard's cufflink, his brother's death. She would watch him, she decided, one careful stitch at a time. Chapter 12. The final unravelling. The rain had ceased, leaving Willowbrook Manor bathed in a pale, watery light that filtered through the clouds, casting a sombre glow over the drawing room where the household gathered one final time. The revelation of Mrs. Agatha Croft's confession that she had accidentally killed Margaret Hargrove and staged Emily's abduction to protect the family's secrets had left a heavy silence, broken only by the occasional crackle of the fire. Emily Hargrove, pale but resolute, sat beside her father, Sir Reginald, whose face was etched with grief and betrayal. Richard Thornton, his posture rigid, stood by the window, while Victor Langford lingered near the door, his usual charm extinguished. Clara Jenkins, her eyes red from crying, hovered in the background, and Lady Beatrice Thornton sat close to Miss Jane Marple, whose knitting needles moved with their steady rhythm, a quiet counterpoint to the tension in the room. Inspector Hale, his notebook now filled with the grim details of Mrs. Croft's arrest, paced before the hearth, his moustache drooping with exhaustion. Mrs. Croft's confession ties up the matter of Margaret Hargrove's death, he said, his voice heavy, and her attempt to silence Emily explains the boathouse incident, but the fake necklace, the impostor in London, and the cufflink. By the river there's still a piece missing. Miss Marple, her pale blue eyes sharp behind her spectacles, nodded. Indeed, Inspector, the threads are nearly woven, but one knot remains. In St. Mary Mead, I once unravelled a theft by noticing a single mismatched button. Here, the cufflink Mr. Thornton's suggests a deeper involvement, one tied to another tragedy. Richard's head snapped up, his face flushing. Told you that cufflink was lost weeks ago. Someone planted it to implicate me. Miss Marple's needles paused, her gaze steady. Perhaps, Mr. Thornton, but the polish on it, untarnished by weeks in the mud, tells a different story. And Emily's diary mentioned your brother Thomas's death, not an accident, she suspected. Could you clarify that for us? The room stilled, all eyes on Richard. Emily's hand tightened on her father's arm, her eyes wide with a mix of fear and realization. Sir Reginald, his voice hoarse, muttered, "Thomas. What does he have to do with this?" Miss Marple produced Emily's diary, opening it to a marked page. Emily wrote, "Thomas's death wasn't what it seemed. Richard knows, but he won't speak. In my village, a whispered secret once revealed a hidden motive. Mr. Thornton, did Emily confront you about your brother's death?" Richard's jaw clenched, his hands balling into fists. This is absurd. Thomas died in a hunting accident, everyone knows that. A stray shot, a tragedy. Emily was grieving, imagining things. Victor stepped forward, his voice low but sharp. "Not imagining Richard. I was there, remember? You and Thomas argued that day over Emily. You were jealous. He loved her and she him. The accident was too convenient." The room erupted, Sir Reginald rising with a roar. "You dare accuse my future son-in-law of murder?" Miss Marple raised a hand, her voice calm but commanding. "Please, Sir Reginald, let us hear Mr. Langford out." In St. Mary Mead, a quarrel overheard by a gardener solved a case of sabotage. "Mr. Langford, what did you see?" Victor's eyes darted to Richard, then back to Miss Marple. "It was no accident," he said, his voice steady. "Thomas and Richard went hunting, but I followed, curious about their road. I saw Richard aim, not at the game, but at Thomas. The shot was deliberate. He covered it up, claimed it was a misfire. I kept quiet. For Emily's sake, she was heartbroken enough." Emily's sob broke the silence, her hands covering her face. "I suspected," she whispered. "The letters in the necklace mothers. Letters mentioned Thomas, how he'd confronted father about her death. I found a note from Thomas, hidden in the locket, saying he feared Richard's temper. That's why I staged my draw out the truth." Richard lunged toward Victor, but Hale's constables restrained him. "Lies," he shouted. "You're protecting your uncle's name, Victor. Elias was the villain, not me." Miss Marple's voice cut through the chaos. gentle but firm. Mr. Thornton, the cufflink places you at the river the night Emily vanished. You planted it, didn't you, to frame Victor? And the imposter in London you arranged her to create a false trail, knowing Emily had uncovered your secret. Richard's face crumpled, his defiance collapsing. I didn't mean to hurt her, he confessed, his voice breaking. Emily found the locket, read the letters. She confronted me about Thomas, threatened to tell everyone. I hired the actress to confuse the timeline, to make it seem she'd fled. I followed her to the boathouse, tried to reason with her, but Mrs. Croft got there first. I panicked, dropped the cufflink by accident. Hale signaled his men, who led Richard away, his protests fading down the hall. Emily clung to her father, her tears falling silently. Sir Reginald, his face grey, murmured, "My girl, I failed you. I failed your mother." Miss Marple patted Emily's hand, her voice soft. "You were brave, dear, to seek the truth. In St. Mary Mead, a young woman once exposed a fraud by hiding a single letter. Your courage brought justice." As the household dispersed, Inspector Hale approached Miss Marple, his expression grudgingly respectful. "You've a sharp mind, Miss Marple. The cufflink, the diary, how did you know?" "People are much the same everywhere," she replied, her needles resuming their rhythm. "Their secrets betray them in the smallest ways, a glance, a word, a misplaced item." The necklace's locket held the past, and Emily's heart held the courage to face it. Lady Beatrice, tears in her eyes, clasped Miss Marple's hand. "Jane, you've saved us from ruin. But poor Emily, what now?" "She heal," Miss Marple said, gazing at the river beyond the window, its surface calm once more. "Truth, however painful, sets one free." As she packed her knitting bag, preparing to return to St. Mary Mead, Miss Marple reflected on the case. The pearl necklace, the boathouse, the impostorol were threads in a tapestry of betrayal, woven from love and jealousy. Richard's crime, Mrs. Croft's desperation, Margaret's murder, they were human frailties, as familiar as the village scandals she'd unravelled. She would return home, to her roses and her quiet life, but Willowbrook's shadows would linger. A reminder that even the brightest veils hid the darkest truths.